Joining us in the studio tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Liz. Good to be with you.
It's actually the first time, so
yes,
it's nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
Yesterday we had your opponent in, the Democratic incumbent Scott Murphy, and he didn't mention you by name, which I thought was interesting, but he did mention things about, quote, my opponent, and I would like to play a little bit of a clip of that and have you respond to it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, here we go.
You know, my approach is that of a businessman who is trying to solve problems. We just had one recently on a piece of legislation that I supported, and we actually got passed into law to close a loophole for companies that ship jobs overseas. I hear this in my district. You talk to local manufacturers. I was up with one in Queensbury just recently, and they said, look, Scott, we're at a 40% disadvantage versus other plants within our company that are located overseas because of the way the tax policy is set up. We are incentivizing multinational companies to ship jobs overseas. Well, we closed that loophole. I think it's critical to focusing on building stuff here, making stuff here in upstate New York, and building our businesses. My opponent said it was a gimmick, and he was absolutely opposed to closing that tax loophole. That's the kind of distinction that's really important for people.
Okay, Mr. Opponent, what do you have to say about that?
Well, clearly we do need to help our businesses. There's no doubt about that. We need to remove impediments out of the way that are really inhibiting their growth and expansion. But, you know, this particular bill he's talking about was the $26 billion for schools and for the FMAP program. And it wasn't budgeted for, and it wasn't paid for. You know, you take a look at the school districts all throughout the 20th Congressional District. They went through great pain over the past year to come forward with their budgets, and hard decisions were taken all throughout our area. And then they come forward with this bill after decisions were already taken, and they say, now we have more money for you. Well, you look at, talk to some of the superintendents that are in the district, and they're not happy about the fact that it's coming with strings. They certainly welcome the money. Right. They don't like the fact the way that the strings are attached to it.
Well, they have to use it to hire back teachers, for example, that they were planning on laying off. But
it's a one-year patch. You know,
doesn't the state legislature have the opportunity, though, to pass a bill that enables them to use that money? I mean, I can't imagine that school districts aren't happy that they probably don't want the strings attached, and it's only temporarily. Right. I understand. But don't you think they want the money?
I do think that they would want the money. Of course, who wouldn't? But the fact of the matter is that's 1 year money.
Right.
And with the way the strings are written right now, it causes them to reopen wounds from tough battles that they fought in the past year. And, you know, the thing of it is, you know, my family, our kids go to public schools, and I'm a product of public schools myself. We're, you know, great champions of it. But the fact of the matter is that everything we do needs to be budgeted and paid for. This is the first time since 1974 we have no budget.
So wait, you would have voted no on that bill, that FMAP bill that provided the additional Medicaid funding and the schools funding for states across the nation. You would have voted no on that?
I would have voted no because, again, it wasn't budgeted and paid for. It's the first time since 1974 we don't have a budget. I mean, this is the time when you need leadership to step forward. The other thing, it wasn't paid for. My opponent has said that he is for PAYGO, and said it full-throated. But once again, this violates PAYGO. Take a look at the CBO rules for how they made up the money. I mean, the tax increases that he's referring to here, and then the rescissions. Rescissions on food stamps program in the future. In 2014, we're scheduled to, if we look at last year's budget, we're scheduled to run over $1 trillion worth of deficit in 2014. You can't say we're going to rescind from a deficit and count that towards payment. This clearly violated PAYGO.
You would also have voted no on the health care reform bill and no on the stimulus. Is that correct? You would have voted no on all of those things.
Yes. Yes. Here's why. What we need to do, and it's related, all this stuff is related, because if we want our private sector economy to grow, which clearly we do, then I think what we need to do is remove the impediments to growth. We have a positive program to do that. It's with targeted tax and regulatory relief, and by repealing and replacing the health care bill, because everywhere we go, everywhere our campaign goes, these are the three major impediments that we hear to growth. And when you grow the private sector economy, here's the thing, Liz, is then the local governments get more revenues.
But how do you get people health care that is going to be provided under this health insurance reform bill? I mean, the idea was to cover people, and now if you repealed it, people would no longer be covered.
Well, the simple facts are this. 88% of those in our district had health care insurance already. The problem is they were paying too much for it. Now, we had a safety net through Medicaid, albeit not perfect, no question about that. But 88% of those in our district had health care insurance, and now they're going to pay more for it. I mean, clearly the major issue before us was cost. And what we ended up doing was taking 2 steps back with that bill and it impacts small business all throughout our district, which is going to hurt job growth.
You know, another
thing
that now. That he says repeatedly, it's one of his major planks, is that he is a businessman. He has created jobs, rather, in the district. This is Scott Murphy we're talking about. It's a very different background than you have. Your background is military. So what do you think actually is more beneficial to the people of the 20th Congressional District, to have a former military guy who's never held elected office before, and this is your first foray into elected office, arguably riding a Republican wave that appears to be potentially sweeping the nation, taking back a Republican district, long held, Jerry Solomon, John Sweeney, etc., until Kirsten Gillibrand. Why would it be better for them to have your profile as opposed to his?
Well, my opponent was a successful businessman. There's no doubt about that. But the issue is how he's representing us in the United States Congress. He's not voting like somebody with that kind of background. Look at what his peers have to say. You know, I met with the head of the New York State chapter of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and according
a pro-Republican group generally,
right. But NFIB, which Mr. Murphy was, as I understand it, a member of when he was back in Missouri. According to the head of NFIB here in New York State, he says that Scott Murphy has a rating of 29% among his peers. So how helpful is that for our small business owners, our small business men and women that every day are trying to fight the good fight on our behalf, creating 70% of the jobs in America, when they have all these impediments to growth, and then we add more with that kind of voting pattern? That's not helpful. What I offer, look, yes, indeed, first time running for political office, but what I do have is proven, principled, and determined leadership that you can count on in the toughest of times. I've led men and women in combat, under fire, in the dark of the night, in the driving rain. We have accomplished our task. We took care of each other. I mean, these are the things that I bring to this experience. And you know, you take a look at the major issues of our time: the economy, the deficit and the debt, and our freedoms, and particularly the war overseas. I would tell you that these are bipartisan issues. It's fair to say that both parties got us into this mess. What we need right now is leadership to get us out.
See, I find that interesting then. Would you feel comfortable voting against the leadership in the House because the House leader was just here? Yeah. The Republican leader was just here raising money for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, I will be a strong and independent voice for this district.
But if the Republicans take the majority, would you vote for John Boehner to be head of that majority, to be Speaker of the House?
Well, he's certainly a strong candidate, and the American people have to speak first. That election, I'm not going to presume any outcome to that election. I think that's a very fair question to ask in the days after the election. But let me answer your question. I think is a fair one right now, and that is how would you feel voting against the leadership? Let me give you a prime example: Social Security. I believe it's a great program. We got a sacred trust that we need to preserve with the generation that spent many, many years paying into that program. You know, my mom is a recipient of Social Security. My dad, before he died, he was a recipient of Social Security. My grandmother's
You're splitting with Boehner on this. That's what you're saying. I understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a good program. What I want to see is its viability strengthened over the years. So if there was ever a bill that came before the Congress where my party tried to privatize it, I'd vote no.
Okay, because that actually has been, the specter of that is now looming large over this race. The State Democratic Party hit you on that when Boehner was here in the district up in Saratoga. In addition, they've hit you on something else, which is to say the discrepancy between your fundraising reports, the actual numbers, and then the top lines that were given to the press in advance of the report becoming live. And it may seem to be sort of a picayune matter, right? But the state Democrats are saying that this is really about you puffing up your fundraising numbers to pretend you're a stronger candidate than you really are, basically. And they say whether it's really about trust, that if we can't trust you to get your numbers right in your fundraising, then we can't trust you to go to Washington. What's your response to that?
Well, clearly, every report that we've rendered with the FEC has been timely and accurate. What you're referring to there was a story that Politico was running. They called our media guy, and they were looking for cash on hand on that day. Our media guy called our accountant and said, what's in the bank right now? They came together. They had that figure. Now, that figure included what we had on hand and a deposit that was put in that day on the 9th of July. And they made a mistake. They made a mistake because they double counted. The deposit was already inside that account. But listen, you know, our FEC report that came forward a week later was accurate and timely. You know, and the reports that have followed have been accurate and timely. I've said all along, we won't raise as much money as my opponent, but we'll raise enough to compete in the air. And you know, yesterday we came up with our first ad.
I do recall.
So,
we saw it. We actually played it last night for the viewers. We had Scott Murphy respond to it. But so then when the state Democrats, just to close the loop on this, say that even if none of the $55,000 in checks that were posted after, when you say the moment in which your spokesman gave the number to Politico, they say that this discrepancy would not have been made right, that this wouldn't add up, and you say that's not true.
No, what it is again, the media, my media guy, called down to our accountant and said they're looking for cash on hand today. They want to know where we're at. And they had a figure that was in the bank, and there was a deposit slip that we have from that day. They took the cash on hand with the deposit slip, they put it together, and that's the figure that they gave to the reporter. Now, what they got wrong is that deposit slip was already counted in to the figure. So this is how you have it. And again, 1 week later, we filed our report with the FEC, and our reports have always been timely and accurate.
So your report actually shows that you have about $500,000 on hand, if I'm not mistaken, which for a challenger is actually a lot of money to have raised. By contrast, Scott Murphy has 1.4 about. He's got some debt, $250,000. However, that's a lot of money. Now he's up fairly early. You're up with an ad. The National Republican Congressional Committee, I believe, has purchased airtime in this. When are they going to be going up on the air, and how much time do you think they're going to spend fighting for you in this district?
Well, of course, there's two different categories here. There are things that they can coordinate with us, and I believe we're going to get a strong commitment. I think it's about $85,000 that they can do with us, and that will help us keep our ads up on the air. And then there's independent expenditures, which I have no control over in terms of what they do, and that's by law.
Right.
But from what I understand, and from what has been reported in the media, they're going to come up later this month with their independent expenditures with ads that support the campaign.
And have they indicated to you that this is a top race for them, that they really want to take the seat back? Because, you know, eventually we're going to see a redistricting, and New York is going to lose a seat. Now, I'm not suggesting that the 20th is on the chopping block, but somebody is going to be on the chopping block, and it's likely to come out of upstate.
Absolutely, they believe we can win this race. I mean, as you pointed out in your opening remarks, this was Jerry Solomon's district. We have a voter registration advantage of 186,000 to 124,000 Republican to Democrat. I think there's 160,000 others. But the district, I believe, is ready to come home. It's ready to come home, Jerry Solomon's district, and we're working hard every day to bring our message to our voters. And incidentally, our coalition, Republicans, conservatives, independents, Tea Party movement followers, and Democrats looking for a better way.
Well, we should also say that the Independence Party line, which is the big I, not the small I, those are the swing voters, those small I independents. The big I Independence Party went with Scott Murphy, so he's going to have 3 lines to your 2. And we will see how that plays out in the general election.
Well, true, but let's not forget, too, that some of the county chairmen for the Independence Party publicly supported us. So we're very hopeful that we're going to be able to reach out to independents and Democrats looking for a better way, that they will join on our campaign and support us in November.
Well, we'll be keeping tabs on your race, but Chris Gibson, in the
Thanks.
meantime, I want to thank you very much.
Thanks.